Okay, great. Thank you. I just wanted to double check that. Lindsay came to us a few years ago, or several years ago, depending on how you're looking at it, I guess. But she came here from, she is originally from Fremont, Ohio, and not Nebraska, Fremont, Ohio. And but Lindsay completed her bachelor's degree at Wilmington College in Wilmington, Ohio, and came here and began a master's in entomology, and which she completed last year. And today she's going to be she's done all the requirements through the DPH program. She's done internships in North Dakota and Washington, and she'll be talking more about that in a few minutes. So this is the final requirement for completing the Doctor of Plant Health degree. So we'll welcome Lindsay today, and I look forward to her talk on the importance of the communication skills to independent crop consultants. Lindsay?
Thank you. Kelly, I'll let you deal with the additional people coming in. I'm trying to organize Zoom so you can see my screen. Okay, good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate you here supporting me, whether that's a few people in person or everyone on Zoom. I appreciate it. So as Dr. Hein mentioned, my title is The Importance of Communication Skills to Independent Crop Consultants. There we go. Okay, so to give you a background of where I started and how I am now, of where I'm presenting this doctoral document to you, really goes back to my experience at the Ohio Agricultural Research Development Center in Fremont, Ohio. Even though I lived only a mile away from there, I did not understand what they did here. This made me realize the need to bridge the researchers to the farmers. This is my passion, where I want to be the bridge that connects the farmers to the practical applications of research. So I'm originally from Northwest Ohio and pursued my bachelor's at Wilmington College in Southwest Ohio. I came here in 2016 to pursue my master's in entomology, and then also pursued during that time the DPH program. I had 2 internships for my DPH program, including North Dakota and Washington. My first internship was at Central Crop Consulting, where we scouted 70,000 acres in southeastern North Dakota every week. So we had a variety of row crops that I've seen as shown there. Now every week we were scouting, and in the early season we were looking at that seed depth and population stands. And while we were doing that, we're also identifying and quantifying pests. Then later on in the season, we're trying to really time out that herbicide application. Just a few images from North Dakota that summer. Next up was my internship in Yakima, Washington with agri-management. Now I got to scout a lot more crops and have row crops and perennial crops, as you can see there. So a mighty diverse experience with some of those awesome pictures that I took there. And then as opposed to North Dakota and Washington, I saw a lot more arthropod activity. You can also see some of those beneficial insect eggs in the bottom left-hand corner. Now getting to my doctoral document. So chapter 1 is the process of communication as it applies to ICCs. Chapter 2, and ICCs are independent crop consultants, and I will be referring to ICCs throughout the presentation. Chapter 2 is ICCs training the field scout using experiential learning and scaffolding. Chapter 3, using farmers' motivation and values to communicate management practices. And finally, on chapter 4 is the ICC's role in bridging communication across the social system. Who are independent crop consultants? So they are unbiased in product sales and knowledgeable about production agriculture. They're knowledgeable with production agriculture and disciplines such as plant pathology, entomology, soil science, plant science, water management, and weed science. However, they must have extensive communication skills. What good is all the knowledge of production agriculture if they are unable to communicate it to their audience? So who are their audience? Their audience are field scouts, which I'm referring to them as student interns, farmers, industry professionals, and government officials. This brings me to the goal of my document, which is to examine how ICCs can refine and strengthen their communication skills. For we're all on the same page here, I am defining communication as a process between individuals involving knowledge or information transfer to produce an outcome that is understood by both the source and the receiver. There are several components to this, including the source, such as the sender. I am sending this message or presenting this presentation to you, that's the message. You are the audience, you are the receiver, and then there will be feedback at the end for questions. The program or the pyramid of communication processes in society, and I'm relating this back to ICCs throughout. So we have society-wide networks, which is the mass communication, institution or organizational communication, looking at more of the political system or business firm. There's inter-group or association, which is a local community. Intra-group, which would be the crop consultants at Central, for example. We also have interpersonal communication, which would be the communication between an ICC and a farmer or ICC and a field scout. And finally, intrapersonal communication. The majority of my document will really be focusing on interpersonal communication to the ICC's audience. Now, I'll be briefly discussing some communication models, and the first one here is the SRAM communication model, and this is a conversation between two people where someone has the message and another person is decoding it and understanding or interpreting what it says, and then finally encoding the new message to the next person, and the person is then obviously decoding, interpreting, and then encoding the message back. An important part of communication is really understanding who your audience is. So that includes knowing your demographics, the sources and channels that those people are using, if that's TikTok versus LinkedIn versus, there are many different channels these days. And understanding your audience's prior knowledge and experiences. If you're talking to a scientific audience, you will have much different terminology versus if you're talking to farmers. In creating the message, there are several things you should avoid, such as jargon, cliches, hype, words, euphemisms, discriminatory language, symbols, acronyms, and slogans. Now, if the symbol is really well recognized, then that might be a very effective way to communicate. There are also very useful strategies in creating your message, such as remembering just to keep it relevant for your intended audience. You could be using metaphors and analogies as well. And due to time, I will only be focusing on message framing. Message framing is highlighting specific parts of the message over others to steer the conversation around certain aspects of the message. An example related to the ICC is the crop stand. So an ICC may say, stand looks good, thin in some places, nothing to worry about. And another example is low population, but it will be okay. And essentially these two statements are saying the same thing. However, an ICC may tailor this message for, use the first one if the farmer is more particular about their crop stand. Next up is a diffusion of innovation theory. And this is a specialized communication model focusing on diffusion, which is a kind of social change. And ICCs are important in diffusing new innovations. They can be essentially also the gatekeeper to different innovations in agriculture and beyond. So there's 4 components of the innovation theory, including the innovation, message, the communication channels, time, and the social system. I will be going through this theory using the hybrid corn example. And so we have hybrid corn, which was released in 1928 in Iowa. The main communication channels that were used was the Agriculture Extension Service and seed company salesmen. As it was released in 1928, there was nearly full adoption of Iowa farmers by 1941. So this took 12 years. And the social system that we're looking at is Iowa farmers. The first component is innovation. So a farmer will perceive an innovation through these different characteristics. For one, Iowa corn had, hybrid corn had a 20% yield increase. Hybrid corn was also very compatible with the existing values, past experiences, and the need for the adopters of Iowa farmers. There was little complexity to hybrid corn because no new equipment was needed. They were able to simply take a different bag of seed and put it into their planter. However, this did require a behavioral change where the farmers, as opposed to open pollinated corn, they were unable to save their seed corn the following year. They were able to put it in different trials and experiment with hybrid corn as compared to open pollinated corn. So this allowed the farmers to observe it in the field, the actual thing that's going on. Now there are the initial communication channels that were used was the Agriculture Extension Service and also seed company salesmen. And then later on, as farmers started to adopt hybrid corn, the diffusion occurred through the conversations of farmers sharing their experience. So this is really interpersonal communication. Now the next component is time. And there are multiple aspects within time. And the first one is the innovation decision process. There are 5 stages, including knowledge, which I'll first begin with. There's different types of knowledge. So one is just being aware that the innovation exists. And this was done by the Extension Service and seed salesmen in the case of hybrid corn. You also need to know the how-to knowledge. How am I supposed to use this? Whether that's simply putting a different bag of seed in corn or in the planter, or, as technology continues, probably more how-to knowledge is very important in the innovation decision process. Next up, we have the persuasion stage, which is where farmers are forming a favorable or unfavorable attitude about the innovation. This really goes back to the characteristics of how a farmer may perceive this new innovation. We have the decision stage, which is, will they adopt it or are they going to reject it? Then we have the implementation stage, where farmers are using this innovation of hybrid corn on a regular basis. In other innovations, we may see that there is a reinvention of it, where you're modifying the innovation to fit the farmer's system. Lastly, we have the confirmation stage, which is the reinforcement of the adoption. And if farmers are exposed to conflicting messages about the innovation, they may reverse the adoption decision. A part of time is also the spectrum of adopters. And this is a bell curve of 100%, and we have varying percentages of the different adopters, as you can see. And with this, we have to think about the innovators and the early adopters. They're really going to be focusing on the initial communication channels, such as the extension service or seed company salesmen. Now, later on, as more farmers are adopting hybrid corn, we'll see that the diffusion is really occurring through interpersonal communication and the social system with the early, late majority, and also the laggards. The social system, as defined by Rogers in the diffusion of innovation theory, is a set of interrelated units that are engaged in joint problem solving to accomplish a common goal. And this is really looking at all of the farmers in Iowa. They're growing corn and to feed their livestock or sell and make a livelihood. Part of the social system is that we also have cultural norms. And in this case of the Iowa hybrid corn, it was very successful. This was very compatible with their existing value system because they were already planting corn. So that was a very successful story. Now there's also an unsuccessful story. This is with Miracle Rice, and the International Rice Research Institute in the Philippines bred rice which yielded higher and was resistant to pest. This was really improving the local traditional rice varieties. However, the taste was not the same. The new Miracle Rice, the taste was not the same, was not comparable to the Miracle Rice. And this was left villagers selling the Miracle Rice at the market, but still growing the local rice varieties for home use. So as agronomists, we need to remember that there are cultural norms that can impact the innovations. And we need to be sensitive in knowing that, hey, we should also taste the product to make sure it's comparable to the previous product. So behavior is critical in adoption, and this is why I'm also focusing on the theory of planned behavior. So this is a model used in explaining, predicting, and changing human behavior. There are three constructs to this model, including control beliefs, which is the ease or difficulty an individual perceives when performing the behavior. The attitude is the behavior shaped by their perception of how favorable or unfavorable the behavior will be. Finally, we have the subjective norms, which is the perceived social pressure to perform or not to perform the behavior. If an individual has a more favorable control beliefs, attitudes, and subjective norms, then there is a greater likelihood that an individual will perform the behavior. So if we're thinking in the case of that this behavior is an adoption of a innovation, we can really look at connecting these two theories, the diffusion of innovation theory and the theory of planned behavior. So within the innovation, we have a potential adopter perceiving the innovation, whether that's those characteristics of relative advantage, compatibility, etc. And this relates back to the cultural beliefs or control beliefs of the theory of planned behavior, that perception. The time component of the diffusion of innovation theory can be related back to attitude. So within time, we have the information decision process where the potential adopter receives the knowledge or information about the innovation. They are then forming a favorable or unfavorable opinion about the innovation, very similar to attitude construct. And finally, we have the social system and the subjective norms So this social system is thinking about those cultural norms. And the subjective norms is saying that, you know, what are the social pressures of a farmer changing their system? So what is deemed normal? So looking at the social, also kind of the norms of the society. So that is how that last one connects. So this was just a brief introduction of the communication theories and models that apply to the ICCs. Now moving on to chapter 2, ICCs training the field scout using experiential learning and scaffolding. The objective of this chapter is really to aid ICCs in training field scouts and emphasize the importance of effective teaching and interpersonal communication strategies that address the needs of field scouts. So the ICC and field scout, this communication is occurring in the field, in the truck, you know, most of the time when you're, you know, if you're not scouting the field on the four-wheeler, then you're talking about, you know, whatever you're seeing. So this requires an open dialogue and active listening on both sides. And I also will be using the educational methods of experiential learning and scaffolding to provide some structure within this communication. To begin with, I'm going to first tell you a story that is using experiential learning. So I was out scouting a carrot field with a sweep net, and I was doing my sweeps, and I seen this in my net. There's nothing. So this is my experience. Now I'm reflecting on this experience. Usually you see all these insects. So I'm thinking about this. I'm also, you know, comparing why I'm not seeing any insects here. I'm putting other pieces together. Here I see a dead beetle on its back. That's obviously not normal. And we also see that there are fresh sprayer tracks in the field. Again, thinking about what I'm seeing in my sweep net. So now I'm acting upon this knowledge of what I've seen and previous knowledge to really come to my conclusion that this field was recently sprayed with an insecticide. So this is a portrayal of knowledge, and this goes back to the experiential learning cycle. Now putting this into the educational terminology, we have the concrete experience, which is the person experience as scouting or, you know, sweep netting the carrot field. We have the reflective observation, which is just seeking questions of why or questioning what's happening. Abstract conceptualization, which is thinking, trying to seek out those answers. And finally, that active experimentation of that portrayal of knowledge of this field was sprayed by an insecticide. The next educational model is scaffolding. This is enabling the field scout to solve a complex problem or accomplish a task unassisted that would be otherwise beyond their current abilities. Within this, we have essential characteristics of the ICC and field scout interaction. As previously mentioned, we need to have an open dialogue. There is a community, collaborative, like shared responsibility of learning. An ICC can learn as much, can learn a lot from a field scout, as well as the field scout can learn a lot from the ICC. We also, within this method, we have the learning that is occurring in the proximal development zone. So this is where the gap between where the ICC needs to support the field scout and provide that assistance, and the point of where the scout is independent while scouting the field. And we next have the component of the scaffolding, so which is monitoring crop health. So an example of the scaffolding that I designed for this chapter is as shown. So we have monitor crop health, pest identification in the field, scouting strategies, quantification of pests, and navigating to the fields. So I went into a lot more detail in my document, so if you want to see that, check that out. All right, So navigating to the field can be one of the most contentious conversations between the scout and the ICC or the person who's training. And knowing directions and being able to read a map is critical to navigating to multiple fields. And I've seen this both as a field scout my first summer and as basically training a field scout the next internship. There are multiple ways to understand directions and how to navigate. GPS coordinates are wonderful when we have cell phone reception. However, crop fields and locations don't always align with cell phone service, so that may not be an option. It is also good if you have cardinal directions and you innately know where you are. However, you can get twisted and turned around and may not innately know. So there are additional ways that you can help train someone or, help train someone as you're learning how to navigate to fields. One is utilizing landmarks, which is basically orientating yourself to cardinal directions by using mountains, rivers, buildings, whatever you have available. We also have sequential navigation, which you're orienting yourself on a location on the map, and then you're navigating to your next field. So an example of sequential navigation is here, where you're pulling into the field driveway. You have to go past you turn right, you go past 3 blueberry fields and 1 mint field, and then you end up at your potato field. Obviously, there's more detail within that sequential navigation, but that is an example. Now, when you're navigating to multiple fields that are next to each other, it is important to develop a route that covers all the fields efficiently, as well as has a meeting place. This meeting place allows the field scout to determine a comfortable pace for the scout, and also for safety reasons. And if we don't meet back at this meeting place as predefined, we can then trace back the other person's step or their process to then make sure that that person is okay. So this is an example of the meeting place. And if someone doesn't end up here, they could have got stuck in the mud or got stung by a bee, or other hazards could have occurred while they're scouting. Not that any of that occurred during my internships. So that's just a brief overview of how I would be training a field scout and what I've learned from my internship experiences. Next up, we have my chapter 3, which is using farmers' motivations and values to communicate management practices. So giving a brief background of this study, it's very intriguing to observe the communication between an ICC and a farmer. And this really leads me to exploring the communication strategies of ICCs and understand how farmers' motivation and values are, helping them to, accept the recommendation, or how they're perceiving this recommendation. I want to mention my collaborator, Morgan Matheson-Slee, who is a PhD candidate in the Department of Community Sustainability at Michigan State University. We were introduced back in 2009, and we, went through the whole IRB process with this study and all the way through the analysis portion. I had 3 objectives for this study, with the first one, explore how ICCs communicate to farmers. To begin with, I'll have an outline with the ICC participants, the interview instrumentation, thematic analysis, and then the results that I found. Now, these interviews were pretty in-depth, and the ICC interviews really focused on how they can encourage a farmer to change management practices. Obviously, I had a baseline of all these questions, and a couple examples of the questions were, how do you encourage a farmer to change management practices? Do you communicate the science behind what is observed in the field? So this basically was a interpersonal communication and that conversation between I and the ICC and the farmers. I had 2 ICC participants of Central Crop Consulting, both of which had certified crop advisor credentials and had a combined 26 years of experience on over 100,000 acres. Both consulted on corn, soybeans, wheat, barley, oats, dry beans, and alfalfa, with one consulting on rye and flax. So my data collection was obviously first starting with the interviews with the ICCs and the farmers. Then I used the automatic transcription service called TEMI to help transcribe the interviews, and going back through and making sure that TEMI correctly said the right words during the interviews. Next up, we have the analysis portion where Morgan and I used MaxQDA, a program for coding. We co-coded these interviews using inductive coding. So this is where we're just highlighting sections that were deemed important. Then we have the development of themes. So this is where we're categorizing the codes into related concepts. And to provide an example of this is, here are 2 quotes from the interviews. Yes, I communicate science, but it's different levels for different farmers. Give them what they need to know so they can defend themselves against misinformation. Another one was, it's important for them to understand that this is a science-based industry. The way plants functions, the way herbicides function, it's a science. So these were highlighted, and then we said that this is educating the farmer. So this is the theme that then emerged. There were multiple themes that emerged during this analysis as we highlighted over 1,000 sections of all of the interviews that I conducted. And I'm selecting those themes that have a greater number of highlighted sections and that more farmers or ICCs spoke about. Moving on to my findings. So we see in these interviews that it's a conversation and understanding how the ICC is, educating the farmer, what are their motivations for the recommendation, how they're tailoring that recommendation, the communication channels of the recommendation, and finally, the communication style. As an ICC is having this conversation with the farmer, one of the aspects of that they're doing is that they're educating the farmer. I already had said this quote, so it's just communicating the science in for different farmers. And both of the ICCs are really presenting this information in a way that makes sense for the farmer, but in a way that is not condescending or off-putting. Now, understanding the motivations behind the recommendations was also a theme. And we've seen that both ICCs took a proactive approach. As one stated, I would rather prevent disasters, put out the fire now before it becomes a big old blaze, where it's out of control and I can't do anything about it. Tailoring the recommendation. This is really what the ICC is constantly doing and is thinking and putting so many pieces together. And this quote really sums it up well. Make sure that farmers recognize there is a challenge and that there are other solutions, but those options have to be custom fit or tailored. Farmers have different goals. That's the puzzle to put together as they find what solutions fit for that farmer in that situation to solve that problem. And reflecting on this quote, you'll see that a lot of these the themes that came from the farmer interviews really highlight specific points within this quote to how the ICC is thinking about the farmers' limitations, their motivations, their goals of their operation. Now, how are these ICCs communicating these recommendations to the farmer? We have multiple channels, but the primary channel that ICCs of Central are using are printed sheets with all of the recommendations on there. However, sometimes they have to be creative in the channel used for individual farmers. As one stated, how people get them, the recommendation, and how people use them are very, very different. And another ICC stated here, for some guys, I have to jump up and down and almost dress like the weed to get farmers to pay attention to me about it. The channels will vary depending on that farmer. And finally, as the ICC is really thinking about how to tailor that recommendation, we have the theme of communication style that emerged, where the ICCs are adjusting their communication strategies to the farmer's expectations and relationship. And as one ICC stated, we have, if you can relate it to something that they're more familiar with, they will understand. My next objective of this study was to explore the motivation and values farmers use when making management recommendations. So these will be my farmer interviews. I interviewed 11 farmers of Barnes and Stutsman counties in North Dakota. They ranged in age from 31 to 65 years. They farmed 1,300 acres to 7,500 acres, with all of them growing corn and soybeans, and 45% of them grew wheat. So these interviews, again, were just simple conversations with guided questions, and these interviews really focused on identity, farming motivations, and goals. Some questions that were asked were, when did you start farming, and what motivated you to start farming? And another one is, what motivates you to continue to farm? So from these interviews, we have a number of themes that emerged. We have the identity of farmers, motivations, limitations, and ICC supporting the farmer. And then there are a number of sub-themes that I will then discuss as here further. The theme identity of farmers, the identity of one is how one would describe, how one would describe, where all farmers ascribe to being a farmer, except for farmers who had livestock. Farmers with cattle, farmers who had livestock would say, I'm a farmer with cattle, or a farmer / rancher. Now, all farmers ascribe to being a farmer most of the time. However, the rest of the time, one farmer had stated, he's a traveling partier. The ICCs think about what the motivations are of farmers, and there are multiple motivations that the farmers identified in these interviews. Knowledge collection was one. As a farmer stated here, the same goal is what it was when I started, just to improve and keep improving, changing, and learning. Soil health was also another one, where soil health was important to these farmers, where keep the soil in good health. It's like noxious weeds. Don't let those get crazy and run away from you. Not letting your farming practices affect others. And that is a pretty profound statement to me, with understanding, your operation, but also thinking about others in your neighborhood. Generational farming was another motivation, as farmers identified, where a powerful statement from a farmer is, 4th generation on it, don't want to screw it up. Economics was definitely another motivation, where one farmer said, sunflowers were diseased and the market went to hell. It was either change or die. Now, again, ICCs are making these recommendations, and they are already, aware of the limitations of their farmers. And the farmers identified 3 major limitations, including labor, which is just making sure we have enough people around. Capital investment was another one, where that's one piece of equipment, a combine, from $125,000 to $400,000 in 15 years. All the farmers were also dealing with environmental changes, as they highlighted. As one farmer stated, back in the 1970s when I started, there is no way you could put cover crops out. We were just starved for moisture. We also realized, or farmers also like pointed out, that ICCs are really supporting them. They're supporting them in their independent of product sales, their knowledge, and with one saying, forewarned us of resistant weeds 5 years before they were coming. I trust my independent crop consultant very much. Emotional support was also emerged, where a farmer said, sometimes people call him not looking for information, but someone to just hold your hand. Finally, this gets me to my third objective, which is determine farmers' highest held values according to the Schwartz theory of basic human values. So I'll define this theory, go into the short value survey, the analysis, and the findings. So there are 10 categories which make up the Schwartz theory of basic human values, and all of the values will be defined on the right, and these are the definitions that the farmers seen when taking this short survey. To begin with, we have universalism, which is broad-mindedness, and benevolence. These two values make up the value category of self-transcendence. Next, we have conformity, which is honoring parents and elders, tradition, respect for tradition, and security. These three values make up the value category of conservation. Now we have power, which is social power, achievement, which is success, hedonism, which is gratification or of desires. And these make up the value category of self-enhancement. Hedonism is also split into another value category. Then we have stimulation, which is daring, and self-direction, which is creativity and freedom. And these last three make up the openness to change value category. Now the darkened lines here show that this is how the general population, if they are sampled, this is how they would fall into these value categories according to Schwartz. Now we have the survey which farmers took, which was called the Schwartz Short Value Survey, SSVS for short. We have the Likert scale from 0 to 8, with 0 being opposed to my principles and 8 value is of a supreme importance. So those are all the values that they had on their sheet. And this SSVS was analyzed using a confirmatory factor analysis using IBM statistical package for social sciences, SPSS. And here are the results of the confirmatory factor analysis. So this is where there's highlighting a correlation between these different values, and then it's as one component, and it divides it into multiple, whatever is mostly correlated to each other. So in the first component, we have power, tradition, conformity, and security. Next, we have hedonism, universalism, and benevolence being another category. And the last value category is stimulation, self-direction, and achievement. We also conducted statistics on these surveys, where we saw that when people ranked tradition, conformity, and security pretty high, they then ranked power lower, and vice versa. And through these statistics, we see that no value mean was ranked less than important. Now, the farmers identified multiple motivations in their interviews, including knowledge collection, soil health, economics, and generational farming. A farmer who is motivated by has short and long-term management practices in mind. And, you know, especially when an ICC may be convincing someone to do a different management practice that is, you know, long-term, this will be beneficial because the farmer is looking for the future generations. And, you know, with these management practices that are long-term, like, you're not going to see the results right away. An interesting finding that we see is, you know, the general population, if they take the Schwartz short value survey, they will have the, they will divide out into these value categories as shown on the left circle. Now my farmers, now we only have 11 North Dakota farmers that took this, and my results are shown on the right. So this is how the farmers differed from the general population, and my results also align with Dorbecki 2011, Grass-Kemper 2020, and Bauer et al. In 2016. So we've seen this in other, and so that would be like Switzerland and Europe and Germany from those 3 papers. So this is how they were different. We're still understanding, and further study will need to be know why they are different. Know why. Yeah. You know, from all these interviews and just these conversations, you understand that there will never be a formula on how an ICC communicates to farmers. And farmers view the ICC as a person who they can trust and who has agronomic knowledge to support their farm. We also highlighted and seen that farmers' SSVS differed as compared to the general population. Now moving on to my last chapter, which is ICC's role in bridging communication across the social system. Going back to who their audience are, we have field scouts and ICCs. The ICC gets to know their scout and understand their strengths and weaknesses, and then they can point them to industry professionals or point them in a career path in which they will be successful at. ICCs and farmers. ICCs are forming a trusting relationship with their farmers while they're learning about their motivation, their values, their communication styles to really tailor that recommendation for that specific farm. Now, these regular interactions that an ICC has may allow them to see behavioral changes and warning signs of stress. ICCs and industry professionals really have the ICCs are collecting these field observations, and this is beneficial for larger agricultural community to provide advance notice of potential pests. And you know, with these industry professionals, you can also be keeping up to date with the current research that is going on to benefit the farmer. Lastly, we have government officials and ICCs. ICCs are collecting those field observations, that boots on the ground knowledge, and they're being an advocate for farmers to government officials, while also they are informing farmers of these government policy and the government policies and the impacts of those. Going back to the beginning, an ICC is very knowledgeable in production agriculture. Through my experiences and this document, we know that also communication is very important skill that they must have. This interpersonal communication is essential for an ICC, but really there is another layer behind that, which is the human component. This is where you have to understand an individual and build a trusting relationship. This relationship is important because humans are multi-dimensional. We, through these interviews and communication theories, we see that humans have multiple facets. We have attitudes, values, motivations, social systems, cultural norms, and limitations. And we as plant doctors need to be well-rounded in the production of agriculture, but also understanding the human dimension to be able to make successful management recommendations in the future. And with that, I would like to thank the many people that have got me here today, including my graduate committee, Dr. Wright, Dr. Jackson Zims, Dr. Gary Hine, Kelly White, Morgan Matheson-Slee, the current DPH students and alumni, and this program wouldn't be existing if there wasn't collaboration between Department of Agronomy and Horticulture, entomology, and plant pathology, and understanding, these interactions that we're having as grad students are very beneficial for us to learn from each other and seeing how they're interconnected of these disciplines. I also want to thank Central Crop Consulting, North Dakota farmers that I interviewed, agri-management, and of course my family and friends. And there's been a lot of people here that you don't know exactly what line you inspired in my document, but you inspired a line somewhere along the way. And with that, I will take any questions. So you can send the chats or send the questions in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself if that's possible, and so forth. I'll try to watch here on.
I have a question for you, Lindsay. This is Clint Pilcher, and I'm with Corteva Agriscience, and awesome job. Really learned a lot, and just really nice job with the work. So first comment is I have an opportunity for you, which I'd like to follow up with shortly after your seminar. But my question is, what is the role going to be of digital tools, that these folks use with farmers to relay messaging and recommendations as we move forward?
Yes, so kind of referring to more of the precision agriculture within digital tools, if I'm understanding that correctly. Okay. So I think digital tools are, important in understanding going forward. And I was with Central and we had a drone that we were flying. And I think the important aspect of, digital tools going forward is that we're having that boots on the ground knowledge come along with the, knowledge that or data that these digital tools are collecting, because we still need to understand, they will provide the data, but we need to understand the system approach of how to manage it. So that is what I see going forward.
So it'd still be really the human element of the discussion is still critical for the information that's provided. I think. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, you can have the data, you can have understanding the system, but then you still need to be talking to the farmer and explaining what the system is doing, or explaining what the, how the digital agriculture, the data is being collected and how it can benefit their farm.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, I have the chat pulled up. I'm trying to find the videos, but I can't find the videos.
Lindsay, I have a question. This is Mark Balschweid. First of all, I think you've done a really nice job of tying in Rogers's theory, the fusion of innovation and Asian's theory of planned behavior into this. You've linked those and grounded them really well. And my background is in social science, as you know. And sometimes we use we use purposive sampling, where we specifically go out and we investigate a phenomenon that's going really, really well. And we want to study what is that what are the characteristics of this thing, this phenomena that's going really, really well. And in this, as it relates to your study, I'm wondering whether it was in North Dakota or in Yakima, did you see examples of ICCs, for instance, that had a really outstanding communication process or methods that they used that farmers really appreciated? And are there elements of that you would say, hey, above everything else, if you do these things, you'll have a greater chance of influencing management practices and decisions? Just curious if you saw any of that.
Yes. So I think, so the farmers were all North Dakota farmers, and I definitely got to see the communication with ICCs in both Washington and North Dakota. And I think overall, it really goes back to you're building that trusting relationship with that farmer, that farmer sees you as personable, approachable, that they want to go see you for any question that they may have. And if you don't know that question, then you either are doing that research or contacting your industry colleagues to, get back to that farmer right away. And I think, there are, communication strategies like framing can be used. There are, those strategies of communication that can be used, but it also just really needs to be paired up to understanding that individual and having just, let's sit over coffee, or just having that conversation. Let's go walk in your field. What are some problems that you're seeing? Those steps are going to get you further down the road versus, just communicating the recommendation, kind of going a little bit above and beyond, and really, fitting within the farmer's, system and their time to be able to just serve them the best you can.
Yeah, that's really good. Thank you.
I don't see. All right, if there's any other questions, you can throw them in the chat or speak up. All right.
I think we've kind of come to the end of our time here. We do appreciate Lindsay's efforts here, and appreciate your attendance, your involvement in this. So thank you very much. And we'll move on to our next and final step, I guess, in this process. So thank you very much. We'll be, again, appreciate your attendance. Thank you.
And if you are actually in person on campus, you can come down to the DPH office and enjoy some blueberry cobbler from the Washington blueberries. So just enjoy some good food. Again, thank you everyone for coming.
Recording on?
Let me just try to figure out. No, I have to do it.